We're talking a lot about the sex offender issue. In fact, it was the nexus of my frustration over that Cairo 7 reporting that Bob Ferguson is trying to dig himself out of this scandal, showing that under his office, sex offenders have been released off McNeil Island at a rapid rate, and he's out there bragging about the few instances where they're able to keep someone confined, and he's not telling voters the rest of the story. And then Cairo 7, they just is able to use the media to push this line that he's somehow protecting communities from these people when he is simply not. So one of the stories that we've told on this show is about a woman named Laura McCullum. She was the first female sex offender in Washington to be confined to McNeil Island, labeled a sexually violent predator and civilly committed after her stint in incarceration. Well, in 2020, middle of the pandemic, again, Bob would never tell you this, Laura McCullum was unconditionally released to Spokane, despite ample evidence that she still was a sexual predator, specifically a pedophile. Her crime was raping a baby. She raped a baby multiple times from 18 months old to 3 years old. She had admitted to having dozens of other victims. She was allowed for a month on sort of a trial basis to be released to Lakewood for a not unconditional, but had strict conditions. 1 month later, she admitted to looking at a 6-year-old girl out the window and thinking about molesting her. So this is as disgusting as it gets. And of course, Bob Ferguson doesn't want anyone to know about Laura McCullum. He doesn't want anyone to focus on the fact that his office and DSHS actually wrote a recommendation that Laura McCullum should be released from civil commitment on McNeil Island unconditionally. So in an effort to sort of help inform people about just how deep Bob Ferguson's lies on this issue go, we brought in the woman who literally wrote the book on Laura McCullum. Sylvia Peterson is an author, and she wrote the book Laura and Me, but she never really intended to be an author. Her story is fascinating. She herself is the victim of sexual abuse. And so she's a religious woman, she wanted for her own purposes to understand why it happened to her. Why she was targeted and victimized. And she thought maybe having conversations with a sex offender would help her come to answers of her own. And so she got linked up with Laura McCullum on McNeil Island. And she visited her often over the course of almost a decade. And she had conversations with this horrible pedophile while she was civilly committed. And they ended up writing a book called Laura and Me, a sex offender and victim search together to understand, forgive, and heal. But Sylvia Peterson came on Sundays with subscribers because, she wanted to try to understand Laura McCullum and what made her tick. But she was never really able to. But there's one thing she absolutely believes today, and she knows Laura McCullum better than probably anyone. She absolutely believes that Laura McCullum should still be on McNeil Island and shouldn't be anywhere where she could once again victimize a child. Here's part of our conversation. I mean, you had hundreds of conversations over 9 years in where she told you things that, she did going back to when she was a kid. You didn't get the sense that any of that and the release of any of that made her better?
No, I didn't.
Wow. Broken. Permanently broken.
Just broken.
Yeah.
Just broken. And even though she understands she's broken, she doesn't know what to do with it either. And there were times she would just sit and cry. She said, I know I'm broken. Nobody knows how to fix me. Even God doesn't know how to fix me. She said, I just, I hope I won't hurt anyone, but I could.
And that begs the question about why she is out today on unconditional release.
Do you want to know why?
Well, I do want to know why.
I'll tell you why.
So can we start first with the first attempt at release and get to that point? To give people context, she had a release to Lakewood on strict supervision. It lasted the first time about a month. As you know, and as you've written about, she saw a 6-year-old out the window and thought about molesting her. And, she went back to the island. They tried again that October, a few months later. She went back to the island again. So just on that, if you can comment on that, the fact she's out for a month, strict supervision, and she still it has these tendencies. What does that show you?
That she's not safe to release. So why did they release her?
You tell me.
Because it's too expensive to keep one woman who has to have an entire wing, an entire staff, must be separate from all of the men for her own safety. It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars annually to keep Laura at the SCC, and they need the space for the men.
So you believe because she's a woman and only because she's a woman, she was released unconditionally?
That's what I believe.
Wow. Because when you look at it just reasonably, you know, an attempt at release, even under strict supervision, is looking at a 6-year-old girl thinking about molesting her. You know, gets out again, still breaks, you know, the conditions. And it's less than a year later that she goes from that failed releases to unconditional release. A therapist who, you know, the court relied on in making that determination said that she showed progress because she thought about having, you know, sex with a 6-year-old girl, but didn't get sexually aroused. So the therapist said that was actually a sign of progress. What do you make of that assessment?
That's ludicrous.
How'd you find out she'd been unconditionally released?
One of her friends, one of the men on the island that she continued to have phone conversations with, called and told me that she had been released unconditionally, and he was sort of coaching her.
Yeah.
And I would get a call ever so often, and I finally said, you know, it's not healthy for me to know what's going on with her. It just brings it all back to me. Yeah. And it's a trigger for me. It brings me a lot of distress. I can't do anything about her.
But when you think of her being out there in the community, do you have real fears that she'll reoffend?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. She's in an apartment. The SEC allowed me to take her to Walmart shopping one time as part of preparing her for release. We'll send a staff person with you, and you can take her to Walmart and buy her some things.
Okay.
And she was so traumatized walking up and down the aisles of Walmart because there were all these children and she wanted them.
Wow.
And we finally had to cut that short. And I took her merchandise, and she went back to the van, and I paid for her merchandise and met her in the parking lot.
Well, I think it adds credibility to your belief that the only possible reason they released her is because she was the only woman. Yeah. I mean, given all the other and you have the Attorney General's office who petitioned, we got to release her because we can't find a therapist that says she'll absolutely reoffend. And I'm thinking, well, could you ever find one that, as you say, has the gift of predicting the future? You know, I don't want to make you get political if you don't want to. So you can just say, Brandi, I'm not going there. But, you know, Bob Ferguson, who this has been his office's job for the last 12 years, he has made this a key part of his campaign for governor. He said that he has been busy as the AG protecting communities from these sexually violent predators, only to find out what the Seattle Times came out and reported is they've been quietly releasing them into communities very rapidly. What do you make of the assertion from him as he runs for governor that he's been doing his best to protect us from people like Laura?
He has created a ticking time bomb. And how many children are going to be permanently damaged before we all as citizens stand up and say, stop, this is a lie. And we need to go back to the drawing board, and there's got to be something else that can be done. We must protect our children. Yeah.
That's an interview with author Sylvia Peterson. She wrote the book Laura and Me. You can watch our full interview at undividedpod.com by becoming a subscriber. But I just had to play a chunk of that on our public show because how powerful is that? I mean, how strong of a woman is that? You know, she went through her own abuse when she was young and spent almost a decade trying to understand it as an adult and sitting across from someone who raped a baby, had other victims. I mean, an incredibly powerful interview. But the takeaway, I think, for, you know, the conversations we're having, this is a woman who knows better than anyone what Laura McCullum is capable of. And she is astounded at the idea that the state of Washington could not or would not make a concerted effort to keep Laura McCullum on McNeil Island, away from kids, away from babies. And look, she's not a doctor. She's not a clinical psychologist. But again, do you need to be if you've had a woman who has sat and told you about her desire for children? She also told a story that, frankly, I thought might be a little too grotesque for the public show. I'll just characterize it. They were out at McNeil Island for a Christmas play, and kids came out to perform a Christmas play for these sex offenders, which is the craziest idea anyone's ever had. But Sylvia and her husband were there, you know, religious people. He's a friend of the chaplain. And Laura McCullum kept getting up and going to the bathroom, getting up, going to the bathroom, getting up, going to the bathroom. Sylvia says Laura told her that it's because she had to go pleasure herself because she was so turned on by what was happening on stage. Yet for some reason, the state of Washington's experts said, well, we can't prove that she is likely to reoffend. And again, so think of how gross all of that is, and consider all of that when Bob Ferguson says he's protecting communities from sexually violent predators. Yeah, I think not.